did 12 years in jail from the age of 16. Now I am a reformed man helping young offenders, and the government is trying to deport me. Alright, welcome back to SouFLoTV again, everybody. It's your host with the most. Watch this. Sometimes, right, we talk about deportees as if they are not human beings. And sometimes we don't know the backstory. We just take what's given to us by the host country who is flinging these people out of the country. So I thought that it would be very interesting to start exposing some of the backstory to some of these people, right? Put a face to the situation, humanize them a little bit and all these things. Some people still won't have any sympathy for them, but it's worth a try. Here goes. After witnessing his aunt getting gunned down in Jamaica at the age of 9, Paul Douglas was sent by his family to the UK, where he flourished until he got dragged into a gang dispute that forced violence back into his life. Now, you can't get in a gang dispute unless you're in a gang, or maybe he got into a dispute with a gang that was trying to recruit him and he wasn't having any part of it and ended up having to pay the price anyways. You know, sometimes you don't go looking for trouble, you know, but trouble come find you. Let's find out about this situation. Alright, so when they said I was going to be on that flight, I closed my eyes and I couldn't see I could just see my aunt dropping to the floor, the same way I saw when I was 9. I felt like I was there all over again and I just wanted to die. I really wanted to die. That's the opening statement. Now, if you imagine you living with auntie, and auntie is who's taking care of you because your family is overseas, right? Them gonna make better for you. A lot of us are familiar with that type of a situation. Some of us get left with grandparents, some get left with auntie, uncle, whoever willing to keep you and them kind of something there until your parents get a foot setting and can send for you. In the process of all that, could you imagine being 9 years old and watching gunman murder your auntie right in front of you? You think you wouldn't be traumatized and then be lucky enough to escape that situation and go live somewhere else where you're not surrounded by that type of a violence, and then you find yourself in situations that get you caught up in the penal system within that new place that you're at? Now, to think about years later, they're trying to send you back to that place where you witnessed at 9 years old your auntie getting gunned down. Just think about that for a second. So, Paul Douglas had been in Colnbrook Removal Center for a matter of days when he was ordered to pack up to get on a chartered flight. The words set him into a panic mode. He locked his door and he began to cut his wrists. This is the person who we said attempted suicide. So for those of you who are wondering, here we are putting a face to that story. Remember, I said that someone saying we're dead down, go back to Jamaica and all this other stuff, and his family has been warned that if them catch them, then they won't murder them and all these other kind of things, right? Well, here he is, and we're putting a face to the name and the story. Those words, pack your things, you're about to get on the flight, sent him into a panic mode. He locked the door in the facility where he was in, and he had something sharp and he started cutting his wrists, trying to cut through main arteries, commit suicide, bleed out. The words set him into a panic mode, right? All he could see was the vision of his aunt getting shot in the head in the street 20 years ago, after she too was deported back to Jamaica. So here's the catch in his story. Now, I don't know if you all know it, but when someone comes seeking asylum, it is against, I don't think it's the Geneva Convention laws or the humanitarian laws that the nation, the host nation that are a part of that group, they're not supposed to turn people away or deport people back to situations where their lives can be taken. I was reading a story where 132 or 136 Hondurans have been murdered so far since they filed to stay in the United States of America. They filed for, wait name again, words are slipping me now. Okay, I want to stay here, please save me, kind of thing. It's dangerous back there, kind of thing. And the US said no, on the grounds of we don't think you qualify. Bye. And asylum, thank you, asylum. And they were denied asylum, sent back, and 132 from one place, Honduras, have been murdered so far, right? So his family has been under threat. His aunt was deported back, and she told them in the UK that this would happen to her if she went back, because bad things was reaching her family and they were all running for their lives, right? Now, I don't know the whole backstory, where them involved in how they got to this point or whatever, but you know how that thing go already. You can't catch Quack or catch him shot, and yo, me I wipe out your whole family. That mean everybody have to go scatter like roach now, right? Anyways, his aunt who he was staying with had actually been deported from the UK, and she met that fate, shot in the head in the streets in front of him 20 years ago. The officers eventually broke into the 30-year-old's cell and found him unconscious in a pool of blood. So he was very much bleeding, bleed out enough to went unconscious. Instead of being driven to the flight on February 4th, the one that went back to Jamaica recently, the one that 56 was supposed to come on, but only 17 ended up coming because there were protests in the streets and people had not gotten their just due process as far as access to a phone where they can get in touch with some legal help, etc., etc. They had to take some people off the flight. He was discharged and taken straight back to detention. So after they broke into his cell, found him unconscious in a pool of blood, instead of being driven to the flight on February 4th, he was rushed to the hospital instead, where he got 22 stitches. Damn, that's a cut. He got 22 stitches. After several days, he was discharged from the hospital and taken back to the detention center, where he is still in the detention center and still subject for removal from the UK. Now, this is one of the cases where we talked about before, where we said, oh no, can't keep him because he's been there since he was 9 years old or 10 years old. He witnessed a murder at 9 of the lady who was taking care of him, which was his aunt, which was also deported from the UK. He ended up getting sent to the UK to save his life, and he has been there until now, when he is 30 years old and had never returned to Jamaica. Now you're sending real damaged goods. Someone who actually didn't talk about committing suicide did it. He just failed at the attempt because they broke the door down and got to him in time, right? So you're sending someone with all these psychological issues and this great deal of fear, PTSD, severe post-traumatic stress disorder, and you're about to send him with no psychological counseling. He probably needs some psychological some psych meds or whatever the hell he needs to get himself stabilized, but putting him back in that situation after he has been gone for 2 decades cannot be good. Cannot be good for him, cannot be good for Jamaica, and I know England don't care, but it cannot be good for them either. So when they said I was going to be on that flight, he said I closed my eyes and I could see my aunt dropping to the floor, and I felt like I was there all over again, and I just wanted to die. I wanted to die. Paul Douglas, was his opening statement. Paul was just 9 when he witnessed his aunt's murder. With neither of his parents around, she had been his main carer until she was forced to flee to England after becoming a target of the gang warfare that dominated their local area in Jamaica. But the Home Office refused her asylum claim and sent her back to Jamaica. And days after she had landed back in Jamaica, she was shot in the head in front of Paul in the street. Growing up in a Kingston neighborhood with one of the highest crime rates on the island, death was nothing new to Paul, even at 9 years old. On the way to school, I've seen dead bodies, he said. He'd hear gunshots, but you become immune to it after a while. When you're living in and around it, you find a way to get by. And a lot of people right now in Jamaica, this is a testimony for their real life in actual places they're living in. And I noticed that on SouFLoTV, there are a lot of people that are judgmental. I know which part you're born is, what you do with the opportunities you get and how you come up, and you must understand that it's much easier to speak like that when those were not your beginning circumstances. It is very hard to get up out of those circumstances. This is very different from being born poor but peaceful. When you're coming from a war-torn area and violence is all you have seen and known ever since you were yay high. You see people get stabbed up, chopped up, shot up. You're used to seeing gun and gunshot and blood and dead bodies. It takes a toll on the mind. It shapes the psychological development of a child into a grown person. And with these children never getting the proper care or the proper aftercare after seeing and witnessing this level of violence continuously, even the highest ranking or smartest psychologists, psychiatrists can tell you that yes, this damaging, extremely damaging to their psychological development and what they become in society in the future as adults, right? So him giving all these testimonies, and there are proof of it. He said, when I was living there in and around it, sometimes I just learned to close my eyes and to pretend that I was in a better place. But the murder of his aunt was the wake-up call for his relatives, and when their home was shot up weeks after that murder, they decided to place Paul on a flight that was destined for the UK. Despite those painful memories, Paul quickly settled into life in London and began to flourish, excelling academically and seizing on opportunities to learn. He achieved good grades in his GCSEs, and he was planning to study engineering at college. At the age of 16, though, he was wrenched back into violence and death he witnessed in his formative years. An altercation with another teenager that began at school, which Paul says he had not wanted to be a part of, escalated into a street fight between two groups. During the fracas, the madness, the 16-year-old was fatally stabbed. The judge acknowledged Paul did not strike the fatal blow, but the jury decided that he and two other guys were jointly responsible. Paul was sentenced to 12 years in jail in the UK at the age of 16. Joint enterprise is what it's called. We went from aspiring young boys to black boys in a gang, just like that, he says. They weren't in any gang. It was a fight that spilled out from inside of the school, out into the streets, and you fighting, your friends helping you to fight. One of them stabbed the person you're fighting with, and now you are labeled in a courtroom by prosecutors as it was a gang, and you're presented as if this was some kind of well-known street gang, etc., etc. There was a lot of talks of gang culture during the trial. That was the last thing I wanted. Coming from such a violent, he said, coming from such at the age of 16, wrenched back into violence, the judge acknowledged that Paul did not strike the first blow or the fatal blow, but that under the joint enterprise, and now this is a school fight, right? So we went from aspiring young boys to black boys in gangs, he says. And there was a lot of gang talk while the trial was going on. Coming from such a violent place, I always used to say when I was growing up that I never wanted to be like the people I grew up around. And I tried so hard. I never engaged in violence. Up until this point, I had never been arrested or in any kind of trouble with the law or anyone. I was trying to get somewhere in my life. Despite the devastation and the anger that came with knowing he would be spending the rest of his youth years and much of his early adult years in jail, Paul's empathy for the victim's family helped him come to terms with his fate. Like, damn, it was a fight, lost his life. I didn't mean to get involved in all of that, and I didn't want to be in a fight with him in the first place, you know what I'm saying? And it ended like that, but I'm still alive. He's dead. So I'm going to accept my years, do my time, regardless, not fight it. Regardless of the situation, someone lost their life, he says. I had to think about the boy's family. A mom, a dad, sisters, brothers. They were suffering. I had to put myself in that position to understand. In this situation, there were no winners. So he decided to try to take a positive approach to prison, continuing his education from behind bars as well as successfully engaging in rehabilitation programs and acting as a mentor for younger inmates. There was a lot of emotions. At the time I was young. You just see your future disappear. I knew I wouldn't be able to experience a lot of things that young people my age did. I was angry at the system, but I found that got me nowhere. I couldn't argue against it. You have to just learn to get on with it. 14 years on, after completing his sentence with a glowing report from the parole board, Paul was setting up a home to share with his pregnant girlfriend, Chanel Gabon, in time for the birth of their first child. But his long-awaited freedom was cut short when he was detained by Home Office for the first time on the day he was supposed to be attending his unborn daughter's ultrasound scan. He already served his time. 14 years in. Remember, he did 12 in prison. So 2 years after he already completed his time, met a woman, fall in love, have a house together, all these things. He's getting on with his life, right? Baby is on the way. Here comes Home Office. And he was detained by the Home Office for the first time on the day he was supposed to be attending his unborn daughter's ultrasound scan. He was taken to Combrook, where he later was told that he was going to be deported to Jamaica. Chantel, who is 28 years old, who is a British national, says that losing Paul just before giving birth pushed her into a dark place. A week or so after he was detained, she went into labor. He was not around to see it. He was now locked up in a detention center for immigration, awaiting deportation. It was something we've always talked about, how the birth would be. We were really looking forward to the moment, she says. But I had to do it all without him. Just hearing his voice on the other end of the phone, it was horrible. Everything we had planned was positive. Paul isn't someone who just wants to hurt or upset anyone at all. From the moment he came out, he has been supportive to so many people. He's done his time. He's a lot more mature now. He has goals. Everyone deserves a second chance. Her words are echoed by Sonia Russo, Director of Offender Behavior Program Plan B, who worked with Paul during his jail term until the present day right now, and was on the phone to him while he was self-harming in his cell. While he was trying to kill himself, she was on the phone with him. After hearing about the charter flight, she says the 30-year-old is an absolute asset to the community. Paul has turned things around and has survived a 12-year sentence. Sonia adds, he has a big impact in the work that we do because he's obviously relatable to the boys that we teach here. So what she's saying basically is, here he is, you know, he's been through it and he arrived here young, so he is already assimilated into the system. This kid don't remember much about Jamaica in comparison to what he knows about England. Furthermore, he knows a whole lot. He's been in British prison longer than he had spent years in Jamaica on Jamaican soil. Let that sink in. Now, he has changed his life around and he's mentoring young youths and trying to keep them away from violence and all that other stuff and working with an organization as a youth mentor. This is someone that can actually be beneficial because it's very different when you're talking to troubled youths. If I'm going to go talk to youths, right, and they're looking at me like, oh, what am I talking about? SouFLo, boy, soft, you know. Him can't tell me nothing about violence. Him can't tell me nothing about gun. This man I never got through nothing before, right? When know about which part we come from. You're not relatable. It goes in one ear and out the other. A person like him is that valuable. He can tell you about the roads. He can tell you about what to expect completely if you keep going down that route. He can tell you how to get out and make a positive change. You know what I'm saying? So she's saying that, yeah, he's an asset to the community. Paul has turned things around, survived a 12-year sentence. He's a big impact in the work that we do because he's obviously relatable to the boys that we teach. What's happening to him just awful, especially his current condition. Volunteering with the charity, Paul has supported young men who have been released from jail, helped them settle back into the community, and has advised prison governors about the best way of teaching inmates, as well as working with child victims of the Grenfell Tower fire. So you're looking at a community activist and an advocate, and they want to fling him out for something he did at 16. Even though he served 12 years completely, they came and got him 2 years after his 12 years was served. My question is this: should somebody like this be deported back to Jamaica? We've got a full job for him here. As soon as we're allowed to employ him, says Sonia, he settled into a new life after prison, and he's been, boom, he's back in these conditions again. It's like he's gone full circle. Since he was a small child, he's had it rough, and he's losing hope that he's ever going to be okay. Despite initial claims by the Home Secretary, Sajid Javid, that deportees were all guilty of various serious crimes, such as murder and rape, Paul was among a minority of them who had actually been convicted of such an offense. But even in his case, the facts point to a more complex story. The 30-year-old is reduced to tears when he talks about his threat of deportation. Everything was good, he said. Everything was good. I was finally getting the opportunity to almost live my life. To be suddenly picked up like this and to be placed in this position suddenly, I'm mind blown, he said. I got released by a high court judge. The judge deemed me not a risk to the public. I walked out of prison with my bags on my back into my own care. I've been working with youth offenders, which made me feel some kind of purpose. I changed some kids' lives dramatically after speaking to them, but they just look at what's on paper. They say that they need to protect the public because this person is very dangerous, but they don't look at the facts. No one wants to listen. Hacking back to his aunt's murder in Jamaica, which came flooding back to his mind when immigration officers came to put him on a flight back to Jamaica, leading him to cut his wrists. Paul says openly, that wasn't self-harm. I wanted to kill myself. I didn't want to just harm myself. I wanted to kill myself. The Home Office was told my aunt was at risk of death, but they removed her and allowed it to happen anyways. Now I am in the same position, showing them all these records and everything that I've done. It's like there are no lessons learned. A Home Office spokesperson said that Mr. Douglas has no legal right to remain in the UK and has been convicted of murder. The laws require that we seek to deport foreign nationals who abuse our hospitality by committing crimes in the UK. This ensures that we keep the public safe. Let me end this video by saying this. There's no way on God's green earth, snowflake earth world that this guy should be heading back to Jamaica at all. The last part is extremely touching, especially because his aunt applied for asylum in the UK told them that this would happen to her if she went back to Jamaica. They sent her back and it happened. So for you to witness that and put yourself in his position, you saw it happen to his aunt, right? And now you're in the same exact position and you're telling them that that's what's going to happen to you. So what do you think your mind is telling you that the next step is going to be for you? Sure and certain death. Do I go out on my own terms, hang myself or slit my wrist? Or do I wait to be deported to Jamaica and catch a gunshot to the head? You decide. What are those kinds of choices? Man, I don't want to see this brother deported. And I will be following the story as closely as possible. And I will let y'all know what transpires next. Leave your comments in the comment section below. And like I said before, we hear, oh, the plane has murderers on it. Did you hear the backstory to that? I'm out. Peace.